Hi, I'm Delphine. My sister once looked me in the eye and said, "Your womb is empty, so your account should be too." And the worst part? Everyone around the table stayed silent. That silence didn't just sting. It opened a door to every betrayal they'd ever dressed up as concern. They used my independence as a reason to steal, my silence as permission to rewrite what was mine. And while they smiled for family portraits, they were already carving me out of the legacy. They thought I'd walk away quietly, but what happens when the one they erased is the one holding the pen now? I arrived early, like I always do. The hostess smiled politely as I gave my name, Delphine Rowe, then tilted her head slightly, scanning her list again. "I'm not seeing you here," she said, her tone just shy of apologetic. "Are you sure you're part of the Greer party?" I motioned toward the gift bag in my hand, neatly wrapped, the card addressed to my father in careful handwriting. "Yes. It's Lyndon Greer's 68th birthday dinner. I'm his daughter." She nodded, unsure, and walked toward the private room in the back of the restaurant. I followed, heels silent against the polished hardwood. The dining room, warmly lit with hanging lanterns, was already buzzing. Moira, my mother, was mid-laugh, wine in hand. Callista, my sister, looked up and caught sight of me. Her expression didn't change. Not a wave, not a nod. Just that practiced smile she uses for clients she'd rather not work with. The hostess approached Callista quietly. I saw her lean in. My sister barely turned, glanced at me, then said something that made the hostess stiffen. She returned quickly, still polite. "It seems there may have been a mix-up. Would you mind waiting just a moment? We'll find a place." I nodded and stepped aside. The family sat around a long table, each spot set with gold-rimmed china, folded napkins, and hand-lettered place cards. I scanned each one. There was one for Callista's husband, for her two kids, 10 and 12, and even one for her mother-in-law Elaine, who wasn't even blood. But there wasn't one for me. A chair was eventually added at the far corner. No place card, no napkin, just a chair, too low for the table and clearly borrowed from another section of the restaurant. I took my seat in silence. No one acknowledged the arrangement. No one said a word. My mother finally glanced at me. "Oh, Del, that must have been a mistake," she said casually. "You know how these things go when Callista books them? She's got so much on her plate." Right, so much on her plate, except, apparently, for my name. I watched the scene unfold from the periphery. Laughter, inside jokes, old stories. I was there, but I wasn't. I hadn't been for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to admit it until that night. My father stood to toast. "To my beautiful wife Moira, who's kept me grounded for 42 years, he began, voice warm, proud. "To our daughter Callista, who gave us two wonderful grandkids and keeps the Greer name shining." He raised his glass. "And to all of you, for being here tonight." Not a word for me. I stared at my untouched glass of wine, swallowed, hard. They'd stopped seeing me a long time ago, if they ever really had. Moira clinked her glass against Callista's. "To the future of the family," she added. Callista leaned toward her kids. "Smile big," she said. A photographer emerged, Callista's assistant, I assumed, and began gathering everyone for a group photo. I started to rise. Moira turned slightly. "Just the immediate family with kids, darling." Just the immediate family. I stayed seated. They huddled near the fireplace. The photographer snapped 3, maybe 4 pictures. I glanced down, my name still absent from the place settings. My fork untouched. That night, back at my apartment in Austin, I scrolled through social media. The photo was already up. Callista had captioned it, "My whole world in one frame." I studied the image. There I was. Well, part of me. The edge of my shoulder was visible behind Elaine's head. They hadn't even cropped me out properly. It was poetic. On the fridge, Sadie's drawing caught my eye. A stick figure with arms too long, a smile too wide. "Me plus Mom, Delphine," scrawled in crayon underneath. I pinned it tighter under the magnet. That little girl, 5 years old, placed in the system after her mother overdosed and her father disappeared. She saw me. She chose me. And that mattered more than any place card on any table. I remembered a conversation from months ago, one of those kitchen table arguments that started as coffee and ended in tears. Moira had sighed heavily, stirring her tea. I just worry, Delphine. No husband, no babies. It's not natural. I just want you to have a family. I have a life, Mom, I'd replied, calm but firm. I'm not empty. She'd smiled sadly, like she pitied me. You'll understand once you grow up. I had grown up. That was the problem. I'd grown past needing their approval. I'd grown into someone they no longer recognized. Later that night, I sat at my desk, journal open. I wrote, "They can erase me from pictures, from speeches, from chairs at tables. But they won't erase what I've built." I looked up at a quote taped to the wall, one I'd carried through college, through grief, through adoption hearings and lonely nights. I can be changed by what happens to me. But I refuse to be reduced by it. Maya Angelou. That was the night I knew I wouldn't be erased. But they were about to be shocked at what I had remembered. After dinner, we all drove over to Callista's house. Well, not all of us. I came alone, as usual. Her oversized home in the suburbs looked like something out of a Southern Living feature. Fairy lights wrapped the porch pillars, jazz music hummed through hidden speakers, and the scent of vanilla candles met me before I even stepped inside. It was the kind of house built for showing off. I was the last to arrive, but no one seemed to notice. I placed my coat on the rack by the door, smoothed down the front of my sweater, and walked into the kitchen where everyone had gathered. Callista stood near the marble island, wineglass in hand, hair perfectly curled. Moira was leaning down to whisper something to her grandchildren, her voice full of sugar and performance. I poured myself half a glass of red, retreating to a stool in the corner. From there, I could watch the scene unfold. Callista's husband was recapping a business deal. Her kids were on their tablets despite her rule about no screens on family nights, and Moira was gushing about how Callista makes it all look effortless. Between the school board and that fundraising gala, I don't know how she keeps up, Moira said, smiling like she birthed a saint. I don't keep up, Callista replied, shaking her head in exaggerated exhaustion. I survive. You know how it is, kids, career, being the glue. I took a small sip of my wine. Not exactly, but I've been tired building something too. It was a simple statement, honest, not bitter. But Callista looked at me like I'd said something offensive. She turned, her wine glass swirling lazily in her hand. Right, she said, smiling without warmth. You must be so tired, Del. From what, though? Running your center? No diaper changes, no school drop-offs, no in-laws to deal with? I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off. Your womb is empty, so your account should be too. The room went quiet. Utterly, unbearably quiet. Moira gasped lightly, her hand fluttering to her chest like she'd witnessed a car accident. But she said nothing. Lyndon looked at his shoes. Even Callista's husband didn't speak. I felt my face flush, not from embarrassment, but from the heat of every buried insult that had come before. And still, I didn't flinch. I turned to Callista and smiled, not because I found her amusing, but because I had already decided what would come next. Thanks for that, I said softly, placing my wine glass on the counter. Then I picked up my coat and walked out. No one followed me, not one person. The drive back to Austin was mostly a blur of red taillights and city exits. I replayed her words over and over, not because I was confused, but because I wanted to memorize how they had landed, like a weapon disguised as a joke. I said the words out loud inside my car, just to hear how they sounded. Your womb is empty. Empty. What a word. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I repeated it like a mantra, but it didn't soothe me tonight. The sting was real, and it burned hot. Back home, I kicked off my shoes and dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood there for a moment, letting the darkness settle around me. Then I walked to my room, pulled back the curtains slightly, and looked out at the city that had never asked me to explain myself. It simply let me build, grow, choose. I sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling mindlessly. That's when I saw it. Callista had already posted the group photo from the dinner. Caption: Thankful for my real tribe, bloodlines, and legacies. There it was again, her need to stake claim over realness, as if it were a title passed down with monogrammed china. In the comments, Moira had written, "My heart in one room." I enlarged the photo. There was my shoulder, again. Just like the last time. Just enough to prove I was nearby, but not enough to prove I mattered. It wasn't the first time. Years ago, we went to Galveston for spring break. I had stepped away from the beach setup to use the restroom. When I came back, the family photo had already been taken. Moira had smiled and said, "Oh, you missed it, but we'll get another." We never did. I wasn't absent. I was just inconvenient. Tonight, the pattern had finally worn through the fabric. I wasn't overlooked. I was erased. Carefully, methodically, and without apology. I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the air too thick. I turned on the lamp and reached for the drawing Sadie had made, a stick figure version of me holding her hand. It was labeled, "Me plus Mom, Delphine." I ran my fingers across it. They think motherhood defines worth. They think if you don't birth someone, you're not built for love, sacrifice, or endurance. They're wrong. I opened my laptop, clicked into a saved folder labeled Legal Backups, and started typing. I wasn't empty. I was just underestimated. And that mistake would cost them. The sky was still dark when I gave up trying to sleep. I rolled onto my side, staring at the faint blue digits of the clock blinking back at me. 4:17 a.m. My head ached, not from the wine, but from the weight of everything that hadn't been said, or maybe from what had been said too clearly. I slipped out of bed and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. In the kitchen, I let the kettle whistle longer than usual before turning off the stove. The steam rose slowly as I poured water over the tea bag. Chamomile. It didn't help. Callista's words from the night before still echoed, but louder now than when they were first spoken. The insult had been one thing. The silence that followed was worse. That silence was agreement in disguise. I found myself staring at a row of framed photos on my hallway shelf. One in particular caught my eye. Maui, 10 years ago. Everyone was on the beach, wind-blown hair, sun-kissed smiles. I wasn't in the photo, not really. Just the edge of my elbow, caught in the frame like I'd accidentally photobombed my own family. I'd gone back to the car to grab the sunscreen. When I returned, the photo had already been taken. "We thought you went for a walk," Moira had said. "The lighting was too perfect to wait." Too perfect to wait. They always had a reason, a schedule, a justification that excused my absence after the fact. The message was clear. Delphine isn't necessary to the moment. I placed the photo face down on the table and sat with my tea until the sun began to rise. A different memory tugged at me. Thanksgiving at my grandmother Odessa's house. I must have been in my mid-20s. The table was a mess of pecan pie, overcooked stuffing, and tension. Callista had just announced she was pregnant with her second. The room had lit up with squeals and tears. After dessert, Odessa had pulled me aside in the kitchen. She'd been slicing cranberry sauce from a can, but her hands stilled when she looked at me. "Fair isn't always equal," she said gently, "but it is just." I hadn't understood what she meant then. Now, I did. Odessa had always seen things clearer than she let on. Her estate planning meetings were never discussed openly, but she made sure I had a copy of her handwritten trust letter tucked in a safe at her law firm. I hadn't opened it in years, but suddenly, it felt like a rope I could still grab onto. A knock at the door startled me. It was Lyndon. He held a manila envelope and wore a look that said this wasn't a social visit. "I figured you might want these," he said, stepping into the foyer. Inside the envelope were old family financial summaries and a note in Odessa's familiar cursive. "For Delphine, in case things ever go sideways." Lyndon stayed just long enough to say, "You've always been more independent, strong." I looked at him for a long moment. "So I don't deserve support because I function?" He sighed. "It's not that. It's just You don't need it the same way. The words hit me like a slow-moving truck, quiet but crushing. That had always been the core of it. They didn't ignore me because I failed. They ignored me because I didn't need rescuing. Strength had become my invisibility cloak. They mistook capability for contentment. On the kitchen counter, I opened my notebook and made 2 columns. What they say: she's strong. She'll be fine. She doesn't have kids, so. What they mean: she can carry the weight for us. We don't have to check on her. She doesn't count. I stared at the list until the ink blurred. Then I stood, grabbed a folder labeled Safe Circle Expansion, and flipped open my laptop. Grant deadlines were approaching, and I intended to meet them, not out of spite, but out of clarity. They had their definition of family. I was ready to build mine. The application took 2 hours. By the time I submitted it, the sun had fully risen and Sadie was stirring in her room. I walked in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You and me, kid." She opened one sleepy eye. "Pancakes?" I laughed. "Absolutely." That Thanksgiving wasn't the last time they erased me, but it was the last time I let them do it without consequence. I wasn't sure why I said yes when Callista texted me a few days later, inviting me to dinner. Maybe it was curiosity or some small desire to confirm what I already knew. The message was simple. Just family, nothing formal. That should have been my first clue. The moment I stepped into her house, it was clear this wasn't just family or casual. The dining table looked like it had been plucked from a magazine spread. Napkin rings shaped like silver leaves, matching wine glasses set with precision, and an elaborate centerpiece that left barely enough room for plates. Her kids greeted me with robotic politeness, "Hi, Aunt Delphine," before retreating to their assigned seats like they'd been coached. Moira was already sipping white wine in the corner, raving about how beautiful everything looked. "Callista really knows how to do these things right," she said with a proud gleam. "I keep saying, 'You're the glue, sweetheart.'" I stayed quiet, choosing to sit at the far end of the table. When the seat felt colder than the rest. Maybe it was me. Over dinner, Lyndon leaned forward and said to the room, but clearly at Callista, "Not everyone could manage what you do and still smile." Moira nodded, chiming in as she reached for more bread. "It's true. Callista didn't have the luxury of just focusing on herself like some people." The words landed like a plate being dropped in a silent room. I didn't react immediately. I chewed, swallowed, and placed my fork down gently. "No," I said finally. "She had the luxury of being prioritized. There's a difference." Silence followed, thicker than the sauce on the roast. Moira blinked, then smiled as if she hadn't heard me. Lyndon looked down, cutting into his meat with more force than necessary. They'd dressed their favoritism as admiration, their erasure of me as subtle praise. I wasn't needy, so I didn't get anything. After dessert, which Callista insisted was homemade but tasted suspiciously like it came from a bakery box, the conversation shifted. Or maybe I stopped listening. I checked my phone under the table and noticed an email that stopped me mid-scroll. State Humanitarian Leadership Award, recipient notification. I blinked. I hadn't told anyone I'd been nominated. I hadn't expected to win. And apparently they knew, because there was a photo of me and my Safe Circle team on the local news site the next day. I saw it while scrolling after dinner. No one said anything, not a text, not a call. At the next dinner, Callista casually mentioned it between bites of salad. "I saw your face on a banner by the freeway," she said. That was cute. That was it. That was all she had to say about an award given to less than 10 people a year. Moira changed the subject before I could respond, asking if I'd seen the new store opening near their church. I didn't answer. What would have been the point? Later that night, as the wine flowed more freely, Moira pulled me aside into the hallway. The lights were dim, and her voice was softer, more fragile than usual. "I worry about you, baby," she said, swirling the last of her Chardonnay in her glass. "You think building things replaces people, but that won't keep you warm when you're older." I looked her in the eye. "Better alone than erased." She flinched, caught off guard. "That's not fair." "No," I said. Neither is this family dynamic. She had no response for that. I left without saying goodbye. No hugs, no waves. As I walked to my car, I whispered to myself, I'm not strong because I chose to be. I'm strong because I was left with no choice. When I got home, I took a photo of my Safe Circle office, an empty conference room I'd turned into a resource center for teen mothers, and posted it to our page with that exact caption. The likes poured in. Strangers saw what my own family refused to acknowledge. The next morning, I made an appointment. Michael, my grandmother's former lawyer, hadn't heard from me in years, but when I called, he remembered my voice. I was wondering when you'd come back, he said. Your grandmother left things in place, just in case. Just in case. I arrived at his office that Friday afternoon with a manila folder of my own, labeled Contingency. Inside were notes, bank records, and every whispered comment I documented over the last year. Not because I was paranoid, because I had started to see the truth. They expected me to take punches and come back grateful. I was done being grateful for mistreatment. Michael opened Odessa's old file, looked at me over his glasses, and said, So, you're ready to protect what's yours? I nodded. No. I'm ready to protect what was never theirs to begin with. If they were counting on my silence, they'd miscalculated more than just money. Monday mornings at Safe Circle were usually quiet. That day wasn't. My inbox had barely finished syncing when the subject line caught my eye. Unusual transaction notice, Callista Greer. The name alone was enough to straighten my back. The message was from Charles, the accountant who handled the joint business ventures started by my grandmother decades ago. Investments that were supposed to support philanthropic work, not private indulgences. The email flagged a sizable withdrawal labeled Educational Advancement, routed directly from one of the family-linked accounts. I clicked through the report and, just as I'd suspected, found it was a tuition payment to an elite private school Callista's son had transferred to after being expelled from the previous one. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. She hadn't just borrowed money, she'd redirected funds meant for charitable outreach into a personal expense, without so much as a conversation. After a quick glance at the day's calendar, I texted my banker. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from him, reviewing every financial movement in and out of the shared trusts. It didn't take long to see the pattern. This wasn't the first time Callista had dipped into that pool. Summer camp registrations, designer therapy programs, even a spa retreat she'd claimed was a mother's self-care seminar. Every one of them tucked under vague descriptions, riding on the Greer name and the assumption that no one, not me, would bother to ask. The paper trail was messy but consistent, and what stung wasn't just the theft. It was the memory of 6 months earlier, when Callista called me in tears. It's for the kids, Delphine, she'd pleaded. I hate to ask, but we're underwater. Tom's investments didn't pan out, and tuition's overdue. She'd sounded exhausted, worn down, not like the sharp-tongued version of her I'd grown used to. So I'd called the school and paid the tuition anonymously, not from shared money, from mine. The next day, at family brunch, she'd lifted her mimosa and smiled as Moira asked how they pulled it off. Tom covered it last minute, Callista said sweetly. He's such a rock. I hadn't expected a thank you, but I didn't expect a lie either. That memory sat like a stone in my gut. I closed the ledger, thanked my banker, and headed straight to Michael's office. It was time. That night, Moira invited me over for dinner, just her, Lyndon, and me. I accepted, curious to see how far this charade would stretch. She served roast chicken and poured too much wine. Lyndon looked tired, like he was hoping to get through the meal without friction. Between bites, Moira said casually, Callista's been working so hard lately. She never complains, never asks for anything. I didn't even try to filter myself. She doesn't ask. She just takes. Lyndon stiffened. She has mouths to feed, Delphine. I feed people too, Dad, just not ones who share my DNA. Moira's eyes narrowed. That's uncalled for. No, what's uncalled for is pretending theft is generosity just because it comes wrapped in a mother's desperation. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. I left without dessert. At home, I opened the folder labeled Contingency. Each section was color-coded. Violation, fraud, legacy. I had receipts. For years, I'd been the silent one, the stable one, the background character in their performative story of family. But quiet didn't mean blind, and stable didn't mean compliant. They only valued sacrifice when it came with fanfare, when it was public and dramatic, when it could be Instagrammed. Mine had been quiet, anonymous, and apparently disposable. But not anymore. I drafted an email to Michael that night. Subject, trigger clauses, action request, body. Michael, can we meet this week to initiate protective clauses per Odessa's final estate structure? I believe it's time. I stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send. They took my silence for approval, but this time, my silence was just strategy. Michael's office hadn't changed in a decade. Same wood-paneled walls, same slightly too large leather chairs, same framed newspaper clipping of Odessa's first foundation signing. But this time, I walked in with 2 folders tucked under my arm, one marked Legacy, the other Proof. He looked up as I entered, his reading glasses resting at the tip of his nose. Delphine, he said, setting down his pen. I had a feeling you'd be back. I didn't sit right away. I placed the folders in front of him gently, like a dealer laying down winning cards. I need to activate the clause, I said. He didn't ask which one. Michael opened the file without a word and began flipping through the documents with the slow precision of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. Your grandmother, he said finally, anticipated pressure, from all directions. She saw them clearer than I did, I replied, sliding into the chair across from him. He nodded, pulling a legal pad closer. There's a provision, buried in the 3rd addendum. If any party attempts to alter the structure of the trust without mutual consent, all decision-making power defaults to the secondary beneficiary. That would be me. Yes, and only you. We sat in silence for a moment as that truth settled into the space between us. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from Moira. I listened to it on speaker so Michael could hear. Hi, sweetie. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Callista's been chatting with the financial advisor. There might be a few changes coming to the fund. It's nothing big, all for stability. Don't worry, okay? I looked at Michael. That qualifies, right? He didn't hesitate. Yes, that's a violation. Let's trigger the clause. I opened the second folder, Proof. Inside were printed emails from Callista, including one she'd copied me on just 2 days ago, casually requesting structural flexibility to optimize liquidity. Her words, not mine. Michael collected the paperwork and walked out to consult with his assistant. I sat alone in the room, hands resting on the table, pulse steady. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was ready. When he returned, he held a document with a gold seal. It's in motion. The trust administrator will freeze all access as of this afternoon. You'll have full discretion by end of day tomorrow. Good, I said. Then let's move my portion into a new vehicle, one managed solely by me and a board tied to SafeCircle. He smiled. You came prepared. I've had time. By the time I left his office, the sun was dipping low, casting warm shadows over the courthouse square. I walked past the limestone steps where Odessa once gave a speech about dignity and protection. Her voice echoed in my memory. Blood binds, but legacy outlives. I whispered, I choose legacy, and kept walking. I drove straight to the location for SafeCircle's second shelter site. The building was still under renovation, but the bones were solid. I walked the halls alone, imagining the lives that would be changed here. Women walking in scared and leaving steady, children who would grow up in a home built on strength, not silence. That evening, I made no announcements, no social media posts, no cryptic quotes or vague victories. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table while Sadie colored beside me. She was drawing a tree, each branch labeled with a name. I noticed mine was the trunk, her own name nestled among the leaves. She looked up. Mom, does this look right? I nodded, throat tight. It looks perfect. The rest of the night was paperwork, transferring assets, signing trustee revisions, filing new tax IDs. Every form, every field, every confirmation brought me closer to independence, not just from Callista and Moira, but from the idea that I had to be quiet to be good. I didn't scream. I didn't throw. I simply made it impossible for them to touch me again. By the time they noticed what I'd done, the ink was dry, and their hands were tied. 3 days passed before the silence cracked. It wasn't Callista who reached out first. It was Moira, soft-voiced and sugary, like she used to be when I was 6 and questioning why Santa never brought me what I asked for. "Sweetheart," she said on the voicemail, "Callista's a bit anxious. Something about the trust. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. She's been talking to our financial advisor about adjusting a few things for stability. Nothing serious. Maybe just give her a call?" I didn't. Instead, I sent a brief text back. I followed the terms, that's all. 2 days later, Moira followed up with another message, an invitation to dinner. "Just family," she said. A calm night. Callista wanted clarity, resolution. I arrived late on purpose. When I walked into Moira's dining room, it looked exactly like I expected. Linen tablecloths, crystal glasses, an atmosphere drenched in civility and falseness. Callista stood at the head of the table, her hair curled to perfection, expression stretched tight. She didn't wait until dessert. "You hijacked our family legacy," she said before I'd even taken off my coat. I took my time removing it, draped it over the back of the chair, and looked her straight in the eye. "No, I protected what was left of it." That cracked her veneer. Lyndon cleared his throat. Moira pressed a hand to her chest. Callista scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You don't even have kids, Delphine. What are you going to do with the family fund? Rename it after your charity cases?" I set my handbag gently on the table and pulled out a small envelope. "Since you're all so concerned with names, I brought some reading material." Inside were copies of transaction records, Callista's misuse of funds, each one time-stamped, each one documented. "If I were vindictive," I said, sliding the pages across the table, "I'd press charges." "But I'm practical." Callista laughed, shrill and defiant. "This is manipulation." "No," I replied, calm as ever. "This is evidence." Lyndon stayed quiet, reading the pages. Moira looked from him to me, unsure where to land. And then, in a moment I didn't expect, Tom, Callista's husband, chimed in, confused. "Wait, isn't that the letter you had me sign off on last spring? You said it was just for consolidating school payments." Callista froze. I turned to her. "Interesting. That's one of the documents Michael flagged. Fraudulent by misrepresentation." The room shifted. I took out my phone and dialed Michael. On speaker, he answered, voice steady and clipped. "Yes, Delphine?" "Can you confirm?" I said, eyes never leaving Callista, "whether the trust fund was ever legally transferred into Callista's name?" Michael didn't hesitate. "It was not. Her request was denied by the estate attorney. Legally, the trust has always remained under its original structure, with you as the conditional secondary beneficiary, activated fully upon attempted manipulation." Silence. Callista's face twisted. She turned to Moira. "Mom, say something." Moira didn't speak, so Callista reached for the only tool she had left. Pity. "I did it for the kids," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't take anything for myself. You know how expensive private school is. And Tom's job." Moira looked at me, her voice quiet. "Can't we undo this quietly? It's family, Delphine." I tilted my head. "They made it loud when they erased me." Moira looked stunned, like she'd never heard me speak with teeth before. "Family's about forgiveness," she whispered. "No," I said. "Family's about accountability too. Something this room's allergic to." I stood, calmly pushing my chair back. No one stopped me. I left the envelope on the table. When I got home, Sadie was on the floor, coloring with her markers. She looked up when I walked in, eyes soft and curious. "Did they yell again?" I sat beside her and smoothed back a curl that had fallen into her face. "They tried, but I didn't need to." She nodded, returning to her drawing. I watched her, quiet pride blooming in my chest. The kind of pride that came not from winning, but from refusing to lose where it mattered. And tomorrow, they'd learn just how much I meant every quiet move I made. The invitation came by group text. Family brunch this Sunday, backyard, healing honesty. Let's move forward. Love, Mom. I almost deleted it, but instead I replied, I'll come, with Michael. No one responded. Sunday morning was sharp and bright, the kind of late spring Texas day that tricked you into thinking it might be mild until the sun hit your back. I dressed simply, black linen, flat sandals, and a necklace Odessa once gave me, with a quote engraved so small you had to squint to read it. Truth doesn't tremble. Michael picked me up promptly at 10:15. He carried a worn leather portfolio and didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted him. Moira's backyard was already arranged like a magazine spread. Plush seating, pitchers of cucumber water, mini scones in rows, and just enough breeze to ruffle Callista's perfectly styled hair when she finally arrived 15 minutes late. She froze the moment she saw Michael. I didn't know we were bringing attorneys, she said, trying to smile. Kind of defeats the healing part, doesn't it? I returned the smile, cooler. Transparency and healing go hand in hand, or so I'm told. The conversation began with small talk. Moira complimented the lemon glaze on the pastries as if she'd baked them herself. Lyndon nodded along to weather updates and yard work tips. Callista sat stiffly, arms crossed, sipping mimosa like it was armor. I didn't speak much. I waited. Callista cracked first. You stole what was meant for my children, she said, loud enough that the birds scattered. I didn't blink. Are you referring to the funds I protected, or the legacy I built while you spent yours? Moira shifted in her chair. Girls! Michael unlatched his portfolio and pulled out a single envelope. Should we skip to clarity? He asked. Inside was a USB drive. He plugged it into the portable speaker Michael had brought. His idea. If they twist anything, let them hear themselves, he'd said. A recorded conversation played, Callista's voice clear, unmistakable, coaxing Tom to sign a document he didn't understand. Telling him, it's just paperwork. Don't worry, Delphine never reads this stuff anyway. Lyndon stood up and walked inside without a word. Moira's face fell. That doesn't change that she's a mother. That deserves priority. Being a mother doesn't make you untouchable, I said. And it doesn't excuse fraud. I reached into my bag, pulled out a printed copy of the trust violation report, and slid it across the table. This wasn't brunch. It was your last attempt to contain the fire, but it's already burning. Callista tried to rally. You're ruining this family. Do you think safe circle replaces blood? Michael cleared his throat. Delphine, I prompted, please ask the question. I turned to him. Where does the trust reside as of this morning? Michael, ever dry, said, all funds are under Mrs. Rowe's legal control, designated for her use and the operating foundation she directs. Permanently. The rest are frozen pending investigation. Callista's jaw clenched. Moira whispered, You've changed. No, I said, standing. I just stopped pretending to be small so you could feel big. I thanked them for brunch. No one answered. As I stepped through the garden gate and into the street, my pulse didn't race. My hands didn't shake. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone to chase me and ask for a second chance. I didn't need it, and I hadn't even started revealing what else I kept buried. 3 days passed. 3 whole days since the brunch that wasn't about healing, but about control. And not a single call came. Not from Moira, not from Callista, not even from Lyndon. But my phone was far from quiet. Notifications poured in, group chats pinged, social media comments piled up, missed calls from unknown numbers. Every alert felt like an echo in an empty hallway. I saw them. I didn't respond. At Safe Circle, I went through the motions. I signed grant approvals, met with board members, answered media emails about the new shelter location. I was present, but somewhere behind the glass. I floated just above it all, watching myself work. At night, I sat with a cup of tea and let the silence of the house wrap around me. Sadie broke it, as only a child can, with the gentlest weapon. Mom, she said, as I tucked her into bed, did I make them mad at you? My breath caught in my throat. I smoothed her blanket. No, sweetheart. You made me see clearly, that's all. She blinked at me. But they stopped coming around. I nodded. That wasn't your doing. That was theirs. She was quiet a moment. I thought grown-ups weren't supposed to be scared. I kissed her forehead. Grown-ups pretend better than kids do. I turned off the light, but her question followed me long after her breathing slowed into sleep. The next morning, I opened my messages and found a string of screenshots sent from a friend. Callista had taken her drama public. She posted a filtered selfie, captioned, "Some sisters don't stab you in the back. They build an entire legal war to destroy you from the front." Beneath it, "My sister destroyed a legacy over ego." Moira, of course, had commented, "We're stronger than greed." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, but I screenshot everything, every word, every lie. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Damage Control and dropped them all in. Facts don't shout. They sit patiently until they're needed. Later that day, there was a knock at my front door. Lyndon stood there, holding a small cardboard box. His eyes were tired, older somehow. I opened the door and didn't invite him in. He stepped inside anyway. He handed me the box. "Your grandmother's things. I found these in the attic. Thought you'd want them." Inside were old photos, yellowed letters, one envelope sealed in Odessa's shaky handwriting. On the front, "She knew. I see that now." He didn't sit. "I didn't stop them," he said, not quite apologizing. "I was afraid of peace being disturbed." I looked at him, waiting. "And now?" I asked. "You disturbed the lie," he said softly. "It deserved it." He left without another word. That night, Safe Circle aired in a local news segment. The shelter was praised for its unique trauma-informed approach, its long-term housing solutions, its dedication to community healing. One donor in the interview called it a testament to legacy over lineage. I watched from the couch, tea in hand, Sadie curled at my side, and for the first time in weeks, I cried. Not from grief, from relief, from seeing truth not just whispered, but broadcasted. Moira saw it too. I know because she viewed every one of my Instagram stories that week. Never liked, never commented, but always there, watching. Callista sent one final text, just one line. "You'll regret isolating yourself." I stared at it, deleted it, blocked the number. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I didn't isolate, I insulated." And for the first time, the silence between us didn't hurt. It protected. Monday morning began with a knock at the door, and a certified envelope dropped into my hand. The seal was unmistakable. So was the weight of the letter inside, heavier than its paper form could explain. The letterhead read, "Travis County Probate Court, Final Confirmation of Trust Adjustment." Callista's name permanently struck through. No appeals, no reversals. Michael had texted me just before it arrived. "It's final. You hold everything, quietly, legally, and fully." I placed the envelope on my desk and didn't touch it for the rest of the day. Instead, I walked into the Safe Circle main office and sat down with Maria, our development director. "I want to start a new initiative," I said, "one that protects women from being buried in bureaucracy when they're already drowning." We called it the Odessa Project. By Thursday, the press release had gone out. I wasn't expecting the response. Calls poured in. A local journalist asked for a quote during a brief phone interview. "I believe in giving quietly," I told her, "until people force you to speak." Her voice softened. "That's going to stick with people." The story trended on local news, then was picked up by a national nonprofit blog. Community leaders shared it. Donations ticked up. So did the visibility, and so did the backlash. A watchdog group published an article titled, "Socialite Misappropriated Family Assets. Sister Quietly Reclaims Trust for Advocacy Work." Callista's face was blurred, but the implication was loud. Moira deleted her Facebook account by morning. Lyndon issued no statement. My inbox filled with support from strangers and silence from blood. Then came the email. Subject: "You won. No greeting, no warmth." Body: "Hope it was worth the family you lost. See." I stared at the screen for a moment, then closed the laptop. No response. Nothing I said would register in her world. She was never listening, only waiting to talk. That weekend, I stood beside Sadie as she held giant scissors for the ribbon cutting of our second Safe Circle shelter. She wobbled. I steadied her hand. The ribbon split cleanly. The crowd clapped. A senator leaned over and whispered, "You've turned something cruel into something crucial." I nodded, smiling through glassy eyes. Let them call me ruthless, I thought. I sleep well now. Later that evening, I met Michael at the office for one final task, signing the transfer paperwork for full trust administration. He placed the file in front of me. "Any last adjustments?" he asked. I pulled a separate sheet from my bag and slid it across the table. "I want to amend my will. This clause, add it word for word." He read aloud, "Legacy goes to action, not blood." He nodded slowly, then pushed the paperwork toward me. I signed. The pen didn't shake. By the time I stepped back outside, the sun had dipped low across the Texas skyline. Warm light flooded the courthouse facade. My phone buzzed. Another donor pledge. I silenced it and slid it into my pocket. I didn't need to post a caption or say a single word. They wanted me broken or begging, but I chose to build. Saturday came in slow and quiet, wrapped in gray light and the gentle patter of rain on my window. For the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone before getting out of bed. The world would wait. I stood at the kitchen sink, watching the storm clouds roll over Austin while my coffee brewed. I didn't think about Callista or Moira or any fallout waiting in inboxes or newspapers. I thought only of how still it felt inside me. Not empty, just quiet. Freedom doesn't roar. It whispers. Mid-morning, a text came in from Moira. Simple. Polished. "Would you meet me?" The house. Just us. I stared at it for a moment, then typed back. "Only on my terms. No spin, no guilt." "Understood," she replied. The house looked the same from the outside, though the lawn was neater than I remembered. Lyndon answered the door. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just nodded and stepped aside. Callista wasn't there. Moira was in the living room, clutching a small velvet box. She looked smaller, not just physically. There was less sharpness in her tone, more wear behind her eyes. "I thought you might want this," she said, opening the box to reveal Odessa's pendant. The chain was delicate, the stone dull with age. "She always believed you'd outgrow our limitations." I took it gently. "She saw what you wouldn't." There was a long pause, heavy but not hostile. "I regret how things turned out," she said finally. "Regret isn't responsibility," I answered, "but I'll take what I need and leave the rest." Lyndon, standing off to the side, cleared his throat. "She made the legacy real," he said. I wasn't sure if he meant Odessa or me, maybe both. We didn't hug, no warm goodbyes, just a strange stillness, like the ending of a long, poorly written chapter. That afternoon, I went back to the Safe Circle office and opened the final storage box in the corner of the staff room. Inside were Odessa's old ledgers, some yellowed receipts, a photo of her with a young volunteer team. At the bottom was a sealed letter with my name. I opened it slowly. "The loudest thing you'll ever do is walk away and not explain." My hands shook. My eyes didn't. I folded the letter and tucked it into my coat pocket. Sunday morning, Sadie and I walked along the river trail. She held a small paper boat she'd made from a magazine page and had drawn a smiley face on it with permanent marker. "Do you still love Grandma?" she asked suddenly, catching me off guard. I thought for a long moment before answering. "I love the truth more," I said quietly. She nodded and bent to place the boat into the water. I named it Peace. We watched it float until it disappeared beyond the reeds. That evening, I updated my will. Safe Circle would receive everything: properties, investments, assets, no bloodlines, just vision. Then I signed a down payment on a small house just outside the city. Lots of light, enough room for books, silence, and Sadie's wild imagination. As I stood in the doorway of what would soon be ours, I whispered to myself, "They may never understand why I left." But I stopped needing to be understood the moment I understood myself. And if closure never came from them, I'd still already built it, with bricks they tried to throw at me. The crowd hushed the moment I stepped up to the podium. A light breeze cut through the Texas heat as sunlight poured across the freshly painted sign behind me, Row House, a safe circle shelter. People filled the courtyard. Donors, volunteers, survivors, and strangers who had followed the story, the scandal, and now the resolution. I wore black, not for mourning, but for clarity. No frills, no distractions. Sadie stood to my left, gripping my hand in hers. Michael hovered a few feet behind, nodding reassuringly. This, I said, voice steady, is what survival looks like when it chooses to rebuild instead of remain silent. No applause, just stillness, then slow nods, the kind that meant people weren't clapping, they were absorbing. The press lined the back, camera shutters clicked softly, but my gaze never left the front row, where empty seats sat labeled, reserved, Greer family. They'd never been claimed. 2 days later, I published a piece titled, When Family is the First Betrayal. It didn't name names, but it didn't need to. I wrote about being minimized, dismissed, labeled difficult. When I spoke truth, I detailed the ways women are erased, not with violence, but with omission, with expectations, with silence repackaged as virtue. By the following morning, the article had been shared over 60,000 times. Comments flooded in. You spoke for us all. I didn't know anyone else had lived this. This is the kind of story they told us to keep behind closed doors. The Atlantic picked it up under the headline, The Woman Who Chose Impact Over Inheritance. I received an envelope the following week, marked in Callista's handwriting. For your eyes only. Inside was a short note, written in her signature rushed cursive. You never understood what it was like being expected to succeed and perform. I didn't ask to carry it. I just didn't know how to put it down. There was no apology. Just deflection wrapped in a half-hearted explanation. I folded it carefully, then whispered, No, I just succeeded without the performance. That night, I sat in front of the mirror, brushing Sadie's hair after her bath. She was humming something off-key, one of those made-up songs children sing when they feel safe. Her reflection met mine, soft and full of trust. They said I was empty, I whispered. But look at what we've filled. I saw flashes of the past in the glass, Moira's tight smile, Callista's dismissive glances, Lyndon's silence, all behind me now, all part of the scaffolding that built what they couldn't see coming. I changed my number the next day. Then I visited the courthouse to file paperwork that would formally separate any remaining financial ties to my maiden name. I kept Odessa's, Roe. It was the name that saw me for who I was. On the way back, I stopped by Moira's home. No one answered the door. I didn't knock twice. I left a small envelope on the welcome mat. Inside, a handwritten note. You chose your legacy. I claimed mine. And I meant it. That afternoon, I met Michael to finalize one last act. A full consolidation of the trust, every cent, every clause, every protective trigger, into the Safe Circle Foundation. I want it bulletproof, I said. He nodded. Already done. We added a statement to the formal charter. In memory of every woman who was called lesser for not giving birth, but gave life to many. I signed it in ink, watched it dry, closed the folder for good. They tried to reduce me to what I wasn't, but I became everything they couldn't control.